It began on a night that seemed ordinary, yet it would fracture my world in ways I never thought possible. Ethan and I had been together for 4 years. We had shared everything: dreams, laughter, and our tiny apartment that smelled of lavender candles and the faint remnants of his cologne. We weren't perfect, but I believed we had something real, something enduring. But love has a way of blinding you, doesn't it? And the cracks that form often hide in plain sight. That evening, I came home late from work. The clinic had been chaotic as usual, and all I wanted was to collapse on the couch with Ethan, maybe binge watch our favorite series. Yet the moment I stepped through the door, the air in our apartment felt wrong. Stale, tense. Ethan was there, sprawled on the couch, but his posture was rigid. His phone was clutched in his hand, his eyes flickering nervously toward me before darting back to the screen. He gave me a half-hearted smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey," I said, setting down my bag. "Rough day?" "Yeah, just tired." He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. I frowned. This wasn't like him. Ethan wasn't perfect, but he'd never been good at hiding his emotions. Something was eating at him, and I could feel the tension radiating from his every move. I decided not to push. Maybe he just needed some space. A few days later, the first piece of the puzzle fell into place. Ethan's phone buzzed while he was in the shower. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. We trusted each other, and neither of us had a habit of snooping. But this time, something made me glance at the screen. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was the way he'd been guarding his phone like it held the secrets of the universe. The message was from my mother. "Mom, can't stop thinking about last night. When can we talk?" My stomach twisted. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. What could she possibly mean? Last night? Talk about what? A dozen scenarios flashed through my mind, each one more absurd than the last. But none of them prepared me for the truth. I didn't confront Ethan immediately. Instead, I spent the next week gathering information. Every time he left the room, I found myself glancing at his phone, piecing together fragments of conversations. The messages were sporadic, cryptic, but undeniably intimate. References to meeting up, shared secrets, and moments they clearly didn't want me to know about. It wasn't just flirting. It wasn't just emotional. It was an affair. And the other woman wasn't some stranger. It was my mother. The night I confronted him was the night everything unraveled. I waited until he came home, my hands shaking as I clutched the phone in my lap. When he walked through the door, I felt a surge of rage and heartbreak that nearly took my breath away. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling, "we need to talk." He froze, sensing the weight in my tone. "What's wrong?" I held up his phone, the incriminating messages displayed for him to see. "Care to explain this?" His face went pale. For a moment he looked like he might try to deny it, but then his shoulders slumped and he let out a shaky breath. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was a mistake. A mistake." I cut him off, my voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash, Ethan. Sleeping with my mother, that's not a mistake. That's a choice." He flinched, but I didn't care. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let him squirm his way out of this. "How long?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on?" He hesitated, and I felt my heart splintering further with every passing second. 6 months, he finally admitted. But it didn't mean anything, I swear. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. 6 months? You've been lying to me for 6 months, and you expect me to believe it didn't mean anything. I kicked him out that night. I couldn't bear to look at him, let alone share the same space. As he packed his things, I felt a mix of rage, heartbreak, and utter disbelief. How could the two people I trusted most betray me like this? But the betrayal didn't stop with Ethan. When I called my mother, demanding an explanation, her response was just as gut-wrenching. "I didn't plan for it to happen," she said, her voice calm in a way that made my blood boil. "But Ethan and we connected." "You wouldn't understand." Wouldn't understand, I repeated, my voice shaking with fury. You're my mother, he was my boyfriend, how could you do this to me? She didn't have an answer, or maybe she just didn't care enough to come up with one. In the weeks that followed, I was a mess. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices, replayed the moments that had led to this nightmare. But amidst the pain, a new emotion began to take root. Anger. Pure, unbridled anger. They had taken so much from me. My trust, my relationship, my sense of security. But I wasn't going to let them win. If they wanted to betray me, I would show them the consequences of their actions. And that's when I came up with my plan. If Ethan thought he could move on without consequences, he had another thing coming. And if my mother thought she could walk away unscathed, she was sorely mistaken. The days after Ethan's betrayal were a blur of tears and fury. My life had been flipped upside down, and I felt like I was clawing through darkness, desperate for a way out. But as the days turned into weeks, my heartbreak solidified into something far more potent: determination. If they thought they could shatter me without consequence, they were wrong. It was time to take control. I started small. At first, it was subtle things. I returned every gift Ethan had ever given me directly to his new apartment. He was staying with a friend from work, someone who clearly didn't know the full story of why he'd been kicked out. Each item came with a handwritten note. Since you don't care about me, I figured you wouldn't care about these either. Petty, maybe, but it felt good. Then I turned my attention to my mother. She had been avoiding my calls since our last conversation, hiding behind her suburban walls of perfection. But she couldn't avoid me forever. I'd make sure of that. The opportunity came when my younger sister, Claire, called to say our mother was hosting a family dinner. She's been acting strange lately, Claire said. I think it's guilt over something. You should come. Maybe you can figure out what's going on. Oh, I knew exactly what was going on, and I planned to confront it head on. The night of the dinner, I arrived dressed to the nines. If I was going to face them, I'd do it looking like a queen. My mother opened the door, her face blanching when she saw me. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice tight. Claire invited me, I replied smoothly. Didn't she tell you? My mother's forced smile was almost comical. Of course, come in. The dinner was awkward, to say the least. My mother avoided my gaze, fumbling through polite conversation while Claire and my stepfather, Greg, tried to keep the atmosphere light. But I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it boiled over. And boil over it did. Halfway through dessert, I decided I'd had enough. Setting down my fork, I fixed my mother with a cold stare. How's Ethan? I asked casually. The room went silent. Claire looked confused, Greg raised an eyebrow, and my mother's face turned an alarming shade of red. Excuse me, she stammered. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. You heard me. How's your boyfriend? You know, the one you've been sneaking around with behind my back. What are you talking about? Claire asked, her voice rising with concern. Greg's gaze shifted to my mother, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Is this true? He demanded. My mother's lips trembled, but she said nothing. The silence was answer enough. The fallout from that dinner was swift and catastrophic. Greg packed his bags that night, leaving my mother to deal with the wreckage of her choices. Claire stopped speaking to her entirely, disgusted by the betrayal. And me, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the only one suffering. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. As for Ethan, I had something special planned for him. He'd been trying to contact me, leaving voicemails full of apologies and pleas for forgiveness. I ignored them all. Instead, I reached out to the one person who could help me deliver the ultimate blow, his father. I'd only met Richard a few times over the years, but he'd always been kind to me. He was the opposite of Ethan in many ways, calm, thoughtful, and undeniably attractive. I knew it was risky, reaching out to him like this, but I didn't care. I was on a mission and nothing was going to stop me. Richard agreed to meet me for coffee, curious about why I'd contacted him. When I told him everything, the affair, the betrayal, the lies, he was visibly shaken. "I can't believe my son would do something like this," he said, running a hand through his graying hair. "Believe it," I replied bitterly. "He's not who you think he is." Richard sighed, his expression heavy with disappointment. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. You didn't deserve any of it." His kindness was unexpected, and it cracked something inside me. For the first time in weeks, I felt tears welling up, tears I'd been holding back since the night everything fell apart. Richard reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on mine. "You're stronger than you realize," he said softly, and in that moment I believed him. What started as an alliance of mutual anger and disappointment quickly grew into something more. Richard and I began spending more time together, finding solace in each other's company. He was a reminder that not all men were like Ethan, that kindness and integrity still existed in the world. It wasn't long before our connection deepened. What began as coffee dates turned into dinners, then late-night conversations, and eventually something far more intimate. Being with Richard felt like reclaiming a part of myself that Ethan and my mother had tried to destroy. He made me feel seen, valued, and respected in a way I hadn't felt in years. The first time Ethan found out about us was pure poetry. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, demanding to talk. But when I opened the door, Richard was standing behind me, his arm casually draped around my waist. Ethan's face twisted with shock and disbelief. "Dad," he sputtered. Richard's expression was calm but firm. "You made your choices, Ethan. Now live with them." I couldn't have said it better myself. To be continued. The look on Ethan's face when he saw his father standing beside me was a mixture of rage and disbelief. It was a moment I would replay in my mind for years, not out of malice, but as a reminder of the strength it took to reclaim my life. Ethan stammered, his usual confidence unraveling. "Why, you're kidding me," he said, pointing at Richard. "What the hell are you doing here?" Richard stepped forward, calm as ever. "I'm here because I care about her," he said, his voice steady. "Unlike you, I respect her." Ethan's anger exploded. "This is insane. You're my father." "And you're my son," Richard replied coldly. "But that doesn't excuse your behavior. You hurt her, you betrayed her. You don't get to play the victim now." Ethan looked at me, his expression shifting from anger to desperation. "This is revenge, isn't it?" "You're doing this to hurt me." I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze. "No, Ethan, this is me moving on. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." The fallout from that confrontation was as messy as I expected. Ethan tried to turn our mutual friends against me, spinning tales of how I'd betrayed him. But most of them already knew the truth. His attempts to vilify me only backfired, isolating him further. Meanwhile, my relationship with Richard blossomed in ways I never could have imagined. At first, I worried about the whispers and judgment. After all, dating your ex's father wasn't exactly conventional. But Richard's unwavering support and love silenced those doubts. He treated me with a kindness and respect I hadn't known I needed. Where Ethan had been selfish and dismissive, Richard was attentive and thoughtful. He didn't just hear me, he listened. Months turned into years, and my life transformed. Richard and I moved in together, creating a home filled with laughter and warmth. Our age difference became less of a concern as we built a partnership based on trust and mutual respect. And then something miraculous happened. I found out I was pregnant. When I told Richard, his face lit up with joy. "You've made me the happiest man alive," he said, pulling me into his arms. It was a moment of pure love and hope, a stark contrast to the chaos Ethan had brought into my life. Our daughter, Emma, was born the following spring. She was a symbol of new beginnings, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a chance for light to break through. As for Ethan, his life took a very different path. He bounced from job to job, struggling to find stability. His relationships were fleeting, marred by the same selfishness that had destroyed ours. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he regretted everything: his affair, his lies, his choices. But by then, it didn't matter. I had built a life I was proud of, one that didn't include him or his drama. Looking back, I realized that Ethan's betrayal had been a blessing in disguise. It forced me to confront my own worth and demand more from the people in my life. It led me to Richard, to Emma, and to a happiness I never thought possible. And for that, I'll always be grateful.